Hi, everybody, back again with another issue of Voices on Radio Zindagi 92.3 FM. We are here with another very important show today, and we're going to talk about Pakistan's the jihad operation in Kashmir. Kashmir has forever been an issue here in America. Whenever we are closer to elections, Indian Americans are are told stories about what's going on in Kashmir and how the American policy towards Kashmir affects our voting processes. So we decided let's give you a lowdown on what exactly is the Kashmiri issue, how is Pakistan involved, and how is American policy going to change with the changing of administrations. And of course, we'll come to that entire sequence in a bit. But first, let's give you a brief lowdown on what exactly is the Kashmir issue. From the early 90s, when the Kashmiri conflict lurked in the background of CIA's proxy war in Afghanistan, to the eruption of insurgent violence in 1988, to the recent Kashmiri connections to terrorist financing and training, this story is long. The Pakistani military has trained over 500,000 insurgents over a period of the last 30 years, and it is a matter of their defense policy. Today, we have with us two very important guests, and I'm going to introduce them to you in just a bit. They are Mr. Arif Jamal, who's an author, journalist, and a South Asia expert in jihad in Kashmir. He's the author of several books: Call for Transnational Jihad, Lashkar-e-Taiba. He has documented it from 1985 to 2014. It's the first detailed study of a terrorist group which is based on primary sources. Arif is also the author of Shadow War, The Untold Story of Jihad in Kashmir, which has been my go-to book for understanding Kashmir and the history of Pakistani involvement in Kashmir. It is an epic book that profiles and analyzes the history of jihad in Kashmir and the role of Pakistan Army in shaping it since 1988. Arif has also written more than 200 investigative and interpretive articles focused on such subjects as Islamist politics in Pakistan, jihad in Kashmir, the Pakistani Army, the role of madrasas, and of course, Afghanistan. And we have with us Kuldeep Khoda, who's a former Director-General of Police, Jammu and Kashmir. He led the J&K Police for 5 years during the years of tumultuous change. Leading J&K Police is amongst the most challenging jobs in India today. He had the job of preserving law and order amid change, and then preserve change among that order, as he says. He did. The accomplishments of this period fetch recognition to him nationally and internationally with the highest civilian awards, and he was also awarded by the Prime Minister of India for his service. For nearly 70 years, India and Pakistan have battled over the territory of Kashmir. Let's start with Arif Jamal. Arif, why? What is going on here?
Kashmir issue is something Pakistanis and Indians will rarely agree on. And from my perspective, I think Kashmir issue has its roots in the fact that both the founding fathers of Pakistan and India had little understanding of current history at that time. And Pakistan messed up by violating the standstill agreement Pakistani founding father Jinnah signed with the Maharaja of Kashmir. I think that is where the problem began, because after signing the standstill agreement, Pakistan and Jinnah should have not gone into Kashmir for a jihad, but they did. And after that, no country could agree on that. And many Kashmiris have told me, I'm talking about militants, said that the real problem in Kashmir was that Kashmiris at that time followed one person, Sheikh Abdullah, and he was not with Pakistan. And that is why Pakistan could never reclaim its could never get what it wanted to. But over the 7 decades of checkered history, Pakistan's goal in Kashmir has been changing. In the beginning, it was a territorial dispute. Then it became more than a national issue and became an Islamic issue. And now it is more a means to keep the Pakistani army in power in Pakistan.
Wow. So what you're telling me is that it started with being a territorial issue, then it moved on to being a religious issue, and now it's a power struggle. If there is no Kashmir issue, Pakistan army loses its power to have a say in the governance of Pakistan.
Absolutely.
All right. Mr. Khoda, would you kindly let us know what your assessment of the basis of this issue is?
No, Arif has spoken about it. Let me add to it. Pakistan has treated Kashmir as an unfinished part of partition. And they always wanted Kashmir with it on the basis of the population. It was a majority, and it is still majority Muslim state. But the means and the agreement of ceding various territories to either Pakistan or India was on the basis of the then rulers, what we called the princely states at that point of time, they acceding either to India or to Pakistan. Now, J&K was slightly late in signing the instrument of accession, but in the wake of Pakistan launching its unprovoked war against India, and what they claimed at that point of time, that these were the tribals, but there is huge proof and evidence, not only to suggest but to establish that they were regulars of army, of course, sprinkled with some locals also who were also armed. They broke that standstill agreement with the Maharaja then. But beyond that, what happened after that is also important. It's that Maharaja, the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir at that point of time, acceded to India, and an instrument of accession was signed. And the instrument of accession which was signed is exactly the same which was signed by over 500 other princely states with the government of India. And there is not a single difference, not even comma and full stop difference between the accession instrument which was signed by other princely states and by Jammu and Kashmir. So that's part of history, but Pakistan never could swallow it. And the first attack was by the regulars coupled with some tribals in 1947, which resulted in creation of a line of control. What was that point of time at ceasefire line and later got converted as line of control after 1971. And since then, the dispute has been raging, initially in the United Nations, and later on, Shimla Agreement was signed after 1971 war. And that became the basis where it was decided that the matter, whatever problem between India and Pakistan is on Kashmir or on any other issue, will be resolved bilaterally. So effectively, it eliminated the role of any third party, including the United Nations, since both countries unequivocally agreed that they will decide the issue between themselves and no outsider will be interfering in it. And when it says outsider, United Nations is a body, but it is composed of different nations. So any other country intervening directly or through United Nations becomes a third party interference. So the matter is to be resolved between India and Pakistan, but Pakistan decided again to launch another war. And this time it was not the regular war, because Pakistan consistently lost the wars in 1947, 1965, 1971. So the then ruler of Pakistan, General Zia-ul-Haq, who came to power through a coup, decided on a policy, what is famously known as bleeding India through 1,000 cuts. The Operation Topak was devised by him in consultation with the ISI. And the essential part of this operation was to train Kashmiri's youth in Pakistan and send them back to launch a so-called freedom struggle and to get Kashmir, within inverted commas, liberated from India. And this operation was started right from 1984. I was District SP of Border District Poonch from 1984 to 1986. We captured a lot of arms and ammunition which was coming from across, and cases were registered, arms were seized, people were arrested. And it is since then that the idea of launching terrorism in Kashmir was conceived and put in action. To say that 1987 elections were rigged, I will not go into that, whether they were rigged or not rigged, but to say that that was the beginning of terrorism, or the terrorism started because of the alleged rigged elections, is totally bereft of any reality, because this plan was conceived much earlier and put into action, its implementation was started much earlier to that. And the first AK rifles were also seized in District Khoda, that's again a border district in Kashmir, much earlier to the elections. Now, having said so, let me briefly mention as to how this jihad, which was launched from across, how it progressed during last 32 years. Now, initially it started through Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Force, which was primarily composed of local boys who were trained in Pakistan and who had been sent back along with arms and ammunition and trained. Now, initially there was a lot of disruption, and the first casualty was the Kashmiri Pandits who were forced to leave Kashmir. It was again a part of the overall planning that what they considered that time that the biggest hurdle in the so-called freedom struggle are the minority community there. So it is better to create conditions whereby they are forced to leave. That resulted in ethnic cleansing of Kashmir, of the minuscule minority compared to the overall population of the state. But these ill-trained local Kashmiri youth were not a force to be reckoned with, and they started falling apart within a year or so. And most of their leaders got either eliminated or got arrested. Pakistan became nervous. It started sensing that the so-called freedom struggle is losing steam and it's bound to die much earlier than Punjab terrorism, which was also sponsored by Pakistan, lasted. So they decided to induct Hizbul Mujahideen into the terrorist ranks in Kashmir, which was composed of locals and also Pakistani nationals who were better trained, who had put through the mill of jihad in various schools, primarily what they called madrasas, but where they were taught about jihad, terrorism, handling of arms and ammunition, and guns. And the Hizbul Mujahideen was launched, and to supplement it, then other terrorist ranks and other terrorist groups started emerging on the scene. All these groups were launched from across through infiltration through borders. And the organizations like Al-Badr, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, the Lashkar-e-Toiba, and many others started coming up. Now, basically, all these groups, we sometimes get confused about it as to what is the aim of all these groups to be launched. If you ask me frankly, and if I can give my assessment about these groups based on the handling of the situation on ground, they're all controlled by one master. That is the Pakistani establishment, which is composed of the state of Pakistan, the Pakistan Army, and the ISI.
Perfect. I'd like to interrupt you right there and take this entire assessment of you and your intelligence on ground, the Indian intelligence on ground, to Arif, who on the other side has intelligence from the ISI, and he has followed the trail of money and he's followed the trail of people within Pakistan for almost 30 years, more than 30 years actually, Arif. Arif, how much of this assessment is right?
Mr. Khoda has summarized in detail what has been happening. And I would like to point out some milestones in the history. Let us remember that jihad in Kashmir was not started by Pakistani army. It was started by civilian prime minister, the first prime minister of Pakistan, Liaquat Ali Khan. It was led by an army officer, and he later wrote a biography how he did it, and that's a very fascinating study of how it all started. But remember that as long as Sheikh Abdullah was relevant in Kashmiri politics, Kashmiri Muslims were not alienated from India, and they did not support Pakistani stand.
I want to take Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah as a separate topic. And of course, you know, my favorite part of your book is your documentation of Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah. And we'll come to that in a bit. But let's carry on. Yes.
I'm just pointing out a milestone. The problem started between 1971 and 75. And the change started coming at that time. Pakistan became active again in 1977. Before that, Pakistan was very, very little active in Kashmir. When Ziaul Haq came into power in 77. And immediately after Afghan jihad, when American and Western money started flowing into Pakistan and Afghanistan, Ziaul Haq started planning a bigger jihad in Kashmir. But until 1989, Pakistanis were not very hopeful of their success in Kashmir. And their estimate was, if they start the jihad in Kashmir, there will be maybe 50 or 500 mujahideen coming to Pakistan for training. And they were rattled when they saw thousands of people coming to Pakistan for training in 1989 and 90, because they had no arrangements for such big number. The Afghan money, which was coming for the Western money, which was coming for Afghan jihad, was mostly diverted to training the terrorists in Kashmir. And then there were different phases of jihad. Started with Hizbul Mujahideen, but then it was taken over by Deobandi Mujahideen, which were actually the Taliban type. And because Pakistan was supporting them in Afghanistan, they had to come to Kashmir also. And then Pakistan raised Lashkar-e-Taiba, which was Wahhabi or Salafi. At that time, they enjoyed support in Saudi Arabia. But now that Pakistanis, that Saudis do not support jihad in Kashmir, Pakistan is again changing its strategy in Kashmir. And what I see in Kashmir happening at this time is that the Jamaat-e-Islami turned Deobandi turned Salafi jihad is now turning into a Brelvi jihad. And the example is at this time, most people who watch Pakistan have heard of Tehreek Labbaik Pakistan, the party which is campaigning against Imran Khan and against blasphemy on Pakistani streets is now being planned to be sent to Kashmir. And I think the next phase in Kashmir could be very, very brutal because a lot of Kashmiris support Brelvi Islam. Kashmiris rarely supported Salafi or Wahhabi Islam or even Deobandi Islam. Deobandi and Salafi Islam were marginal in Kashmir, but Brelvi Islam is grassroots Islam in Kashmir, and in Kashmir they call it Sufi Islam, peaceful Islam. But I never agreed with that thesis. I think it will be Brelvi Islam or Sufi Islam has been very violent in India in history, and it will be very violent in Kashmir also. Probably, if Pakistan could have its way, probably it will be more violent than we have seen in Kashmir in 90s, for example. So we must look.
So you're predicting that Pakistan is gearing up for another wave of violence in Kashmir through insurgents and highly trained militants. But where is this money coming from? Where's Pakistan is borrowing money from China right now. Where is this money coming from?
Pakistan has money as far as jihad is concerned. But remember, these terrorist groups do not depend on Pakistan army or Pakistani state for money. They depend on Pakistani state for permission to operate. They are into crime. They are into other ways of raising funds. They raise, Pakistanis give a lot of charity to Islamists. And I think the bulk of money comes from the Pakistani and worldwide Muslim diaspora.
But does this Muslim diaspora that we are talking about, what do they think about the Kashmir issue? Are they sympathetic towards the? Let me put the cause of the Kashmiris in quotes here, because I still have not understood what the cause over here is in the first place. Because the cause has kept changing its form with whoever is in power and whoever wants to play the game between India and Pakistan within Kashmir. So I've always looked at the Kashmir issue as an issue where whoever is in power in Kashmir has tried to make the most of the situation by turning India against Pakistan and Pakistan against India, and then somehow retaining power in the middle and playing this little game. And politically, I want to go back to the start of your documentation of Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, and of course, Mr. Khoda, your understanding of Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah's politics, because I believe that's where it all started. In your book, Shadow War, Arif, you have documented that Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah had even gone to Dubai for a meeting with Ayub Khan at that point in time to actually tell him, I can be with you if I get, these are my demands, right? And a lot of them were, personal demands. Let's talk about that. How have the leaders of Kashmir led them down, and why isn't the Kashmiri population still, coming to terms with it? I'll start with Mr. Khoda, and then I'll come back to you, Arif.
Okay.
As far as Kashmiri political leadership is concerned, the people of Kashmir, except for voting in the elections for governance and development, there have been, the separatist franks have been always there, right from 1947. though they have never been powerful voice. And initially, Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah was the dominant voice. And when he died in 1982, he was still a very popular leader. On his death, the funeral procession was several kilometers long. It occupied the entire space from Lal Chowk to Hazrat Bal, where he was buried. That was the sentiment of people with Sheikh Abdullah. But after him, the leadership started getting discredited for various reasons. And also because the leadership was also unstable. And Farooq Abdullah was maneuvered and his MLAs got defected. Rather, they were made to defect on, that's an open secret now. And the government collapsed. And his successor, Shah, was installed, though he also lasted for just a couple of years. So the political framework has been very unstable after that. And in 1990, there was the direct central rule, which lasted till October of 1996. And immediately after National Conference again came to power in the elections in late 1996, then there was emergence of another political party as an alternate to National Conference, the People's Democratic Party. And then lots of other parties started emerging beyond the national parties like Congress or the CPI. So politicians somehow became irrelevant as far as the unrest is concerned. Yes, the voting has been always there. The elections have been, especially the 2002 elections, 2008 elections, and the 2014 elections have been very fair, conducted under the Election Commission of India. But I would like to go back to the initial point, which was very well elaborated by Arif also. The funding of the terrorists has been also through narco-terrorism. They are in drugs trade. Drugs are coming very frequently from across the border, and for that purpose, drones are also being used. And the terrorists have a very powerful machinery in the form of generating funds, not only through drugs, but through zakat, which forms an essential part of the religious ritual or religious duty of the community. And then there have been many other nations also where the separatist groups are freely operating, especially in Europe and US also, where funds are being raised and sent across. That's why India had to screen lots of NGOs here and regulate the flow of foreign funds to them and to exactly know the purpose of the funds. And lots of funds got stopped in the process because those funds were getting misused. They are not being used for the purpose for which they were purportedly being got from around the world. So it's a well-knit nexus. And beyond that, as Arif mentioned, the initial money which came mainly from US for fighting Taliban in Afghanistan, a lot of it was diverted. You know, there is one, beyond many other schools, training schools, there is a famous place about 60 kilometers east of Peshawar, where this, what we call as University of Jihad is functioning. It is the Darul Uloom Haqqani, where 4,000 terrorists are trained openly under the patronage of Pakistan leadership. And it has been there when Pakistan was repeatedly assuring US that their resources are getting drained in fighting against terrorism, and we are the victim nation. But at the same time, they were training the terrorists to help the Taliban, to help the Haqqanis in killing the US soldiers. The US was funding the death of its own soldiers in Afghanistan that way. And our investigations revealed, not investigations exactly, by intelligence actually revealed, that when the school was set up, $2.7 million were given as the first installment to set it up. And then it was funded by Tehreek Insaf Party also, they also raised funds for it. And in 2017 also, as per our inputs, $2.7 million were given to it by the by the Pakistan, not directly, but through channelizing it through other sources. Now, this University of Jihad is famous for producing the top leadership of Taliban and the LET and the Jaish. Mullah Muhammad Umar graduated from there. Ibrahim Jalaluddin Haqqani graduated from there. Yunus Khalis, Muhammad Nabi Muhammadi, and lots of top leaders of terrorists graduated from there. And it is functioning openly under the eyes of everybody. And you know the history of Osama bin Laden, how he was given shelter close to army cantonment area. And that way, Pakistan has been a history of distortion, deception, and deceit. And the terrorism has been mushrooming from there. The origin of terrorism is from Pakistan. Global terrorism, the basic foundation, the fountainhead of terrorism, global terrorism is Pakistan. And the world over, ironically, most of the nations who are supposed to know it, they know it very well. But somehow, nobody wants to bell the cat. Even the sanctions by FATF are not getting into place. Every meeting ends up in continuing the Pakistan in grey list and not blacklisting it. China is overtly supporting Pakistan despite its very bad record or condemnable record of human rights in Xinjiang.
Against Uyghurs, yeah.
Against Muslims.
Yes.
China is supporting Pakistan against India. Now, this is a strange situation where the global community is shutting its eyes to something which is bound to disturb the peace in the entire world at some point of time. So it is very important that the Western press, the media should try and focus on it and compel the political leadership to take note of it and impose sanctions on Pakistan and think of several measures to make it impossible for Pakistan to allow the use of its territory for exporting terrorism to other countries.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you over here. I think there is a great amount of education that is not only required here in America across educational institutions and organizations and think tanks, but also within a political brass. We are live on Radio Zindagi 92.3 FM HD2. You are listening to Voices, and we are talking about Pakistan's jihadi movement using Kashmir as a tool. And I have with me Mr. Kuldeep Khoda, the ex-Director-General of Police in Jammu and Kashmir, and Arif Jamal, very illustrious writer about jihad situation in Pakistan and India. Arif, coming back to you, there is one specific scene from your book that has stuck to me over the last, God knows, 15 years since I read the book, and I've been recommending that book to everybody I know. This scene is, you've documented, and I think there are pictures that you published as well of Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah flying to Dubai to meet Ayub Khan.
Yes. Sheikh Abdullah was getting alienated from Indian state because he was not getting the same response other state leaders were getting. So at one point, he did think of putting his weight on Pakistan's side. But Pakistani leaders were too arrogant, and they did not give much attention and wait to what Sheikh Abdullah proposed. And that did not really became a big issue. Sheikh Abdullah went back and stayed in Kashmir, did his politics. Yes, that shows to me that India has not done enough uh, to satisfy Kashmiri's desire to be mainstream. For some reason, Kashmiri Muslims, not maybe Hindus and uh, Jammuites, that they were not part of the part of uh, uh, part of bigger India like other states, and uh, I think this is a core issue as far as India should be concerned. Mr. Khoda pointed out what the West should do. Trust me, Kashmir is a non-issue in the West, in the United States. And they don't even, most of them, they don't even give, call it terrorism. I've spoken to a lot of officials in the United States, think tankers. I'm really disillusioned. Even after 9/11 attacks, they still believe that Kashmir is a regional issue and India and Pakistan should work together on that. And they do not want to go beyond that. And we should not expect them to do that. I think this is an issue India has to solve alone.
Which is very strange because every time we have an election here in America, the Indian American vote is swayed by making allusions. We allude to the Kashmir issue and we make statements like, oh, if you vote in this person, he will take Kashmir away from India. So do not vote for X person, because if you vote for X person, Kashmir will become an issue. The tool is used, yet for our political administration and for the understanding of even our reps. We have a few Indian American reps that are both on the Pakistan caucus and the India caucus. I don't know how that would work, because India caucus and Pakistan caucus are at crossroads with the same funds, right? And they're using the funds against each other most possibility and not in the development work that the funds might be allocated to. But having said that, how does this even work? That the bare minimum understanding of one of the biggest issues in South Asia, which can literally blow three countries into a nuclear war, which is China, Pakistan, and India, three nuclear heads. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, a couple of things. The United States leaders have very little knowledge of the world outside the United States, one thing. And they don't want to understand that. My friend, Pakistan's ambassador Haqqani has deliberated on that a lot in many articles and his books, one thing. The other thing is, yes, you're right. Every time there is an election, Pakistanis think that if they vote this party, they will work for Pakistan, help Pakistan get Kashmir, and Indians say the same. There was, I remember, just before the Joe Biden elections, Indian Americans were very thrilled and said, "Oh, Kamala is there, and now she will do this." I said, "Look, Kamala Harris will be the vice president of the United States, not India. And she will do exactly what the United States administration wants to do. She will not go out of her way, she will not go against the party line and do something exceptional for India." So I think she hasn't done anything as far as I know. And yes, she will. Anybody in her place would have done as much. So
and I think the dichotomy over here is that Indians in India and Pakistanis in Pakistan think that Indian Americans or Pakistani Americans here in America are going to vote for their interests, Whereas they don't understand that the interests of Indian Americans and Pakistani Americans with respect to America is a very different issue than their interests with respect to their own countries.
Yes, absolutely. You see, I always tell my Pakistani American friends and Indian American friends that you should now start thinking like Americans. And as an American, I believe that Kashmir is a threat to the security of the United States of America. And that is why I am into it. That is why I think America should intervene and stop this jihad and yes, sanction Pakistan or whatever. I don't want to go into policy details, what I believe, but it's in the interest of the United States of America to stop this Pakistani jihad, not only in Afghanistan, but also in India and Kashmir.
Yes, and when just a few episodes ago we tackled the Afghanistan crisis, and our dear friend Christopher Swift was on panel here, and again it's the same understanding that Afghanistan is Afghanistani issue right now. We have other bigger issues. We have intelligence that bigger issues exist elsewhere. Our resources have to go there, but nowhere in this entire Afghani episode even Kashmir was brought up as an important part of the fallout of the Afghan issue, as India might perceive it to be, or Pakistan might perceive it to be. So I'm pretty sure that the knowledge is limited and the understanding is limited. However, before we decided that we were going to have this chat, Arif, you also told me that this great integration of ISI within the United States and their point of view. What is the point of view of ISI exactly? How do they claim Pakistan? What is the entire logic?
Some was very clear, but if I get you right,
Arif,
United States.
Arif, you're a little choppy. I'm gonna stop it. I'm gonna wait for you to come back. Are you back? In the meantime, I'm going to take that question and ask Mr. Khoda about it. Mr. Khoda,
Yes.
what do you think the ISI role here is? What is the entire intent of ISI?
Yeah, it's very important. ISI is using its entire lots of resources to generate world opinion. It's funding lots of groups in US to propagate the Pakistan's point of view on Kashmir. They're holding lots of demonstrations, and their mobilization on that front has been quite good. And India has not been able to match them to that extent as far as open demonstrations are concerned for or against Kashmir, as far as Indian point of view is concerned. But that apart, the point which Arif made is that India has to fight its own battle. I certainly agree with it. And nobody else is going to fight for India as far as Kashmir is concerned. But the situation which is developing here is something we should concern the global community at large. The Pakistani approach has been to send in insurgents, which are being imported now that lots of LET cadres, the Jaish cadres, and the Tehreek-e-Taliban cadres, who were earlier fighting along with Afghani Talibans in Afghanistan, they have been relieved. And there is evidence now that lots of them are trying to infiltrate into India. And there has been recently a long battle in the Punch border by the infiltrating group who were believed to have come directly from Afghanistan via Pakistan into Kashmir. Now that is going to increase. Beyond that, Pakistan is not only sustaining the jihadi factory in Pakistan, but it is expanding it also. You know, in Pakistan, in 1947, there are just 137 madrasas imparting this sort of religious training and radicalization, coupled with other things also, which are basically not in connivance with coexistence of different religions in a composite manner. And under Bhutto, this started increasing, and till 1979, 852 madrasas were added. Later on, it was further expanded by Zia, and till 1982, he did not add much, but 151 madrasas again. By 2002, another 1,000 madrasas were added. And now the estimate of madrasas in Pakistan is over 10,000. Now, this is an ever-expanding factory. Now, and India has been facing the terrorism for last 32 years. India has tried to use all its diplomatic and economic efforts to rein in other countries, to check Pakistan in the sense of putting sanctions against them, making it difficult for Pakistan to export terrorism. But it has not delivered the results. Pakistan is continuing with its game plan and expanding it also. And as Arif has mentioned, I agree with him that the levels of terrorism are likely now to increase, given that lots of terrorist cadres are now available to Pakistan from Afghanistan to be pumped into Kashmir. The levels of violence are bound to increase now. And with the supporting jihadist factories, including the role of Hafiz Saeed and Masood Azhar. And ironically, Pakistan has been giving space to extremists and terrorists in political mainstream now. The head of the Haqqani Madrasa, which trains over 4,000 traders at any point of time, he has gone to the Samuel Haq, has gone to Senate twice in Pakistan, and he is actually supported by Pakistan Prime Minister's party. Now, this is the state of affairs in Pakistan, and India is bound to lose patience at some point of time. And India may be left with no option but to act militarily. Already, India has made its intent clear when there were Udi strikes across the border. Then they were further increased to penetrating deeper into Pakistan territory in Balakot airstrikes. And it should not take world community by surprise if India has to launch a bigger military offensive to stop Pakistan against continued terrorism against India. And at that point of time,
the world will get
flashpoint can erupt.
The world will get impacted, and America needs to understand that.
And it will be disastrous for the entire globe. So
absolutely,
the who are silent, who are thinking it is just a Kashmir problem between India and Pakistan, should realize the dimensions of it and go into depth of it and perceive the consequences which it can lead to. So I think it needs a deeper introspection at the global level, primarily because it is using terrorism as a weapon to get something which should be normally resolved through talks or through the agreed mechanism between two countries which don't want war.
Yes, but the strategy for Pakistan has forever been to create this kind of a incentive for local people to take up terrorism. It has changed the minds of people. It has infiltrated the thought process. And the question remains, what do Kashmiris want now that they have been indoctrinated? What do they want now? And of course, we'll come to that in a bit. But I want to go to Arif and ask about, there have been reports that even India has occupied Pakistan, and there's insurgency that India has caused in Pakistan. What is the truth about that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
My question is, there are reports that tell us that even India has a counterinsurgency happening within Pakistani territory, and that has been caused by India in certain areas of Pakistan, causing unrest. And as a kind of a counter strategy to what Pakistan has done within India and within especially Pakistan, within especially Kashmir. I'm sorry. So, what is the truth about India's operations within Pakistan?
I think it's very insignificant if there is any such thing. Having said that, I believe that India must be funding some of the anti-Pakistan elements in Pakistani Kashmir and also in Pakistan. Of course, Pakistan and India are the arch enemies. So it's foolish to think if India doesn't do that.
Arif, you're choppy. Your voice is cutting off a little bit.
Okay, so what I was saying was that whatever India has been doing in Kashmir is insignificant as compared to what Pakistan has been doing in Indian Kashmir. Of course, Pakistan and India are arch enemies, and India must be doing something. I'm not aware of that, but it's very insignificant.
I see. So the question over here, of course, is that with all these years of indoctrination, with people walking over and these madrasas being run, and a lot of Kashmiris, local Kashmiris from India walking into these madrasas and getting indoctrinated, there is a new thought process within Kashmiris that's very different from the thought process that Kashmiris had at when 1947, when the Treaty of Accession was signed. Of course, the folly that everybody points out too is Jawaharlal Nehru should never have said that there'll be a plebiscite that would be held, right? So that issue of plebiscite is still very raw, and people think in Kashmir think indoctrinated now, think that it's disservice to them as Kashmiris that the plebiscite was never held. That's one part of it. And the second part is, what do they want now? Should the Indian government not look at what these Kashmiris want now? What is the thought behind that? Because of these many years of indoctrination, of being told that you're unsafe in India, India is a Hindu country, you're Muslim, that entire indoctrination starting from territory to religion to now power, right? You don't have the power. So what is the process in your head, Arif, that what should the Kashmiris be asking for, if they have an ask, that is? Arif, you're completely cut off here, so I'm going to move the question to Mr. Khoda right now. Mr. Khoda, while Arif gets back online, let's talk about that.
I will take up the first question also, which you addressed to Arif. He of course, replied it very correctly. And it reminds me of saying when Pakistan was giving shelter to Osama bin Laden in its army cantonment area, and at the same time joining US forces in search of Osama bin Laden, then getting US money to fight terrorism, and at the same time training the Haqqanis in the big madrasa in Peshawar and sending them trained to fight US forces, sending Tehreek-e-Taliban cadres, Jaish cadres and LET cadres to fight US forces in Pakistan, and then tell them that we are victim of terrorism. And Pakistan raising this bogey of India supported any terrorism in Pakistan is exactly like that. But Pakistan has been thoroughly exposed at the global level, not once, twice, but all the time. And I don't think there are any takers of this sort of claim by Pakistan. But coming to plebiscite, now there are two reasons why I would like to say that it has no relevance in the present context. First of all, after the signing of Shimla Agreement, the UN resolution has become irrelevant as well as obsolete. The second point is that the plebiscite, which was that time thought as a solution, was subject to various conditions. And it is one of the conditions is that the Pakistan should demilitarize entire POK. Pakistan has never agreed to that. It has never said that they are going to demilitarize POK at any point of time. Then the plebiscite at that point of time was to be held by the and the votes were, the referendum was to be participated by the people who were residing in POK and in Jammu and Kashmir on our side. Now that demography has been totally disturbed by Pakistan. The northern areas have been amalgamated with Pakistan main territory. There has been a lot of settlements and resettlements in POK. The population complexion there has totally changed. Now you cannot get back that population demography back and have a plebiscite. The conditions which were laid down for the plebiscite, they are not implementable now. So when the condition cannot be created, how can the plebiscite be held? Number two, as I mentioned, Shimla Agreement, any subsequent agreement makes the previous agreement irrelevant. So we have to go by the Shimla Agreement, not by any other agreement or resolution prior to that. So we cannot keep on going back and forth to various resolutions as it suits us. So obviously there is no merit at all in any sort of plebiscite to be thought of at any point of time in future.
Arif, what do you say to that?
Yes, I agree that at this time, Shimla Agreement is the solution. But the problem is Pakistan is not ready for that. So what do? We can't unilaterally implement Shimla Agreement or any agreement. You see, we are left with very little time. And I want to stress once more the connection between Afghanistan and Kashmir. We have seen that for last more than 4 decades now, Afghanistan and Kashmir are interlinked. And we have seen that the rise of Taliban a couple of months ago in Afghanistan has made situation precarious in Kashmir also. And if Taliban succeed in Afghanistan, Kashmir has a bleak future. So defeating Taliban in Afghanistan will have an unintended consequence in Kashmir, and that will be to defeat militancy there. So this time the West is concerned about Afghanistan like it was 30 years ago. So there is a ray of hope in that. But remember, we cannot convince the West and the United States to pay more attention to Kashmir than it does at this time.
Which is really no attention as of now.
Absolutely.
It's just not
Absolutely.
on the agenda at all.
Absolutely.
My second part of my question was, of course, that what about the people of Kashmir? They, having gone through this entire tumultuous process, and of course with indoctrination, with religious and economic indoctrination, and having lived in brutal militancy for so many years, they need a way out, and a lot of them, for them, the way out is Pakistan. How do you even answer that?
I think India has to work on solving the issue of alienation among Kashmiri Muslims. I think they are not as fond of Pakistan as they were 30 years ago. And one of militant leaders once told me, those who have been in contact with Pakistan since 1980s are totally disillusioned. And only those who have not seen the real face of Pakistan are still fond of Pakistan. I think it has to be a multi-dimensional strategy for India to work on that. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy.
Mr. Khoda, what do you think about that?
Let me make a point which clarifies the entire situation. The issue in the United States, or subsequently after that, pertains to entire J&K, which includes POK and the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir. And let's forget about POK for the time being. Pakistan is wanting to claim our part of J&K, now, which includes Ladakh also, and Kashmir, where the unrest is there. It constitutes just 15% of the total territory of Jammu and Kashmir with India. That is 15% of the total territory. B, let's go to demography. the population ratio is about 65-35. 65 majority Muslim community and 35 is the non-Muslim community. Now, among the 65% of the Muslim community, another about 25% lives in Jammu areas where there is no unrest at all, which includes Punch, Rajouri, Doda, Gur, Banihal, Ramban, and upper parts of Kathua and Riyasi also. Now that leaves 40%. Among that 40%, there are lots of Gujars and Shias and many other sects of the community which constitute another 15%. That leaves 25%. And among those 25% also, all are not anti-nationals. There are, but few voices also make a lot of noise. It is the noise part which is creating the problem at global level, because they shout a lot. They organize lots of demonstrations with the help of Pakistan funding and Pakistan support. That sometimes there is a feeling outside that there is a lot of population which is against India. Now, for 15% of the territory and roughly say maybe 15% of population, you cannot hand over a territory to another country, the enemy country there. And we cannot think of having the referendums in pockets of any country. No other country will allow it. So how it is expected that India is going to do it? So I think the world should recognize the reality and go by the realism rather than by propaganda and the appeasement policy at different levels.
Thank you so much. That's very nicely summarized. Of course, thank you, both of you, for being on this show. This is all the time we have today on Voices and Radio Zindagi. For nearly 70 years, India and Pakistan have battled over the territory of Kashmir. You have heard about Kashmir, but it doesn't feature anywhere in American foreign policy. There are 3 nuclear-armed states that have a stake in Kashmir. That is China, that is Pakistan, and that, of course, is India. And now the war that Pakistan is sponsoring, the terrorism war that Pakistan is funding, is being fought in shadows over the last 40 odd years. And because of this, we're at a tipping point in Kashmir, and the world needs to see what exactly is happening and needs to stop this from happening. We are here on Radio Zindagi, Voices, 92.3 FM HD, and we are also live on the Radio Zindagi Facebook live handle. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Mr. Khoda and Arif. It was a real pleasure having you talk about this very important issue that the world needs to know.
Thank you for having me.